Welcome back to the Wellbeing Uprising. I'm your host, Bethany Ainsley, and today we're exploring a topic that impacts every one of us, both in and out of the workplace: sleep. Good quality sleep is essential for focus, energy, performance, and long-term health. But with the pace of modern life, and for some, the demands of shift work, getting the rest we need can be challenging.
You are tired and depleted, you're not at your best, but you maybe don't recognise, and the people around you don't recognise, that you're dangerous. And I think that's probably the prime area for errors.
In this episode, we're looking at how sleep affects our ability to thrive and how organisations can play a supportive role in helping people build healthier habits around rest and recovery. Joining me are two brilliant guests who both bring personal insight and professional expertise to the conversation. First, Dr Rachael Coates, a robotic colorectal surgeon who spent years working night shifts in the NHS and now leads innovation in MedTech and AI. She'll be sharing her lived experience of sleep disruption in a high-pressure role in the NHS and how smarter systems might help support better balance.
Everyone has expectations that we're okay because we're the care providers, and I think it can be really difficult acknowledging that you aren't okay.
I'm also joined by Nicole Ratcliffe, founder of the Workplace Sleep Coach, who helps organisations implement practical, people-centred strategies to improve sleep and well-being at work.
52% of people have said that work is going to bed with them, and it is impacting their sleep. On that, 62% of people, when they wake up, already don't feel rested. So we're on the back foot right from the beginning.
Thank you both for joining me today. I'm really excited about this episode. It's something that we've had requested a number of times, so I think our viewers are going to really enjoy it. I'd like to start with you, Rachael. Could you tell us about your experience doing night shifts in the NHS?
Yeah, of course. So when I first started doing night shifts, I was a junior doctor or a junior resident in my early 20s, and I'd had a little bit of experience of night shifts, shadowing people, but never really worked and been responsible overnight. And then it was a whole new world. It's incredibly tiring, but I was footloose and fancy free, so I could go home after the night shift, and I used to sleep all day. So I'd get a good 10-hour sleep, recover, and be ready to go back and be fresh for the next night shift. And I found it quite difficult in terms of I used to get some bloating and feel uncomfortable, not know what to do with my food. But I managed to do my shifts, I think, safely. And then things really changed as I got older, and I had a family, and your other commitments increase. You find sleep's much harder to come by, just in general, I think. But, you have jobs and pickups and extra things to do during the day, commitments which really you can't just pass off to somebody else necessarily. And so my sleep then became a couple of hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And it does massively then impact your ability to function well or feel well, I think, during a night shift. It became more of survival than, doing my best work. You would feel the difference on a busy night shift. The adrenaline would get you through, but then you didn't have that recovery the next day, and you would go in the second night shift completely depleted. I think the other thing to say is that as a doctor, the most night shifts I've done in a row is usually 7, and I think they've cut that back now. It's not recommended to do more than 4 usually. But the first night shift, most of us haven't slept. So you're really doing 24 hours minimum, and that can be a really difficult shift. And I think there's things that you can do to try and counteract that a little bit, but it is incredibly difficult the first and probably the last night shift when you're just completely exhausted.
Just to highlight the seriousness of this as well, because you are dealing with people's lives, have you seen firsthand the impact of sleep deprivation on the type of work that you do?
Yeah, definitely. So, me, myself, I'm a surgeon, so I might need to do an emergency operation in the middle of the night. And occasionally, and it is only occasionally, that might be all night. So it might be more than one operation. And I found myself at 4 o'clock in the morning during one night shift, having done 2 big emergency operations, lying in the theatre coffee room, and I just closed my eyes and that was it. I was asleep, and it wasn't intentional, but I was just completely exhausted, oblivious to anybody else around me, and just having micro naps in order to try and function and go on. And there isn't always somebody that you can call in the middle of the night for that when you're the boss, when you're the consultant. So you've got a supporting junior team, but they might not be the person that's capable of doing that operation. There's been times when I felt completely exhausted and I have called in a colleague. So that's often towards the handover time in the morning, saying, you know what, the lion's share of this operation is done, and I'm going to let my consultant colleague take over now because I'm not doing my best work. And at this point, you don't want to make an error because it is life and death.
Yeah, exactly. And do you think that people always recognise that they need somebody to take over? Or is that when errors potentially occur?
I think it's really difficult. I think when you are completely past yourself, you understand that you are. But I think it's in that sort of grey zone where you are tired and depleted, you're not at your best, but you maybe don't recognise, and the people around you don't recognise, that you're dangerous. And I think that's probably the prime area for errors, because people aren't recognising that they are a bit slowed down, their decision making's a bit poorer, and that things just aren't going with, like, you know, they're not frictionless, smooth processes anymore. We don't talk about it enough, I don't think. There's a lot that we can change, I think, within the NHS as a whole. Obviously, I work within like surgery. There's a lot of work to do still.
And it's not just in the operating theatre, is it, where dangers can occur? It's also for the individual who's then got to travel home.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's been some real tragedies with reported junior residents that have died on their way home from work from falling asleep at the wheel. And you know yourself, I mean, I've personally had experience of this. I used to do research and I would do a night shift to pay my bills, go into the lab during the day and then try and drive home. And, you know, most of the time I was okay. I wouldn't say I was good, but I was okay. One day I felt I just couldn't stay awake. I pulled into the lay-by and I had to have a power nap, which is ridiculous, but I didn't feel safe to drive. And there's been times when the noisy lumps on the side of the road have woken me up, and you have these micro naps. It's so dangerous.
But I think, thank goodness that you did, because I do think that some people just wouldn't recognise that and they would continue.
Yeah, I think we all feel a little bit invincible. It won't happen to us. Or I've got these commitments I've got to get home for. I've got, life pressures, so I'll be okay. And I think that doctors are very much of the I'll be okay attitude. It gets drilled into us through training. We work long hours. Everyone has expectations that we're okay because we're the care providers. And I think it can be really difficult acknowledging that you aren't okay. And culturally, it's still difficult to speak up about that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine.
So some of the things that you actually said there are some of the things that I talk about quite frequently in the work that I do. And you mentioned about being awake for 24 hours on that first night shift. And what people don't seem to realise is actually 24 hours awake is the equivalent of being over the drunk drive limit. And we think, do we actually want people in work that are over the limit? After they've been drinking alcohol. That isn't what we want, but actually we're expecting people to go into work and work like they are fully functioning. Mm-hmm. There is also something else that you said, which is to do with the role when you become a parent and how that changes you. And there is a huge shift that we've got to understand that happens. Sadly, it's primarily to the women when they have children. And there is a lot of work to do within the workplace to try and have better gender equity for both mums and dads, parents as a whole, within the workplace, so it doesn't all fall to mum. And that is what we're seeing. We're seeing there's a huge shift biologically, societally. Women are more negatively affected by poor sleep. And there has been studies that have been done that show that women need more sleep than men. And by depriving both man and woman of sleep and them getting the same amount of sleep, women are actually more negatively affected with mental health, anxiety and physical health before the man is. So women do need more sleep, but through things like a societal expectation of women as the main parent, main caregiver, menopause, all the different things that women are going through, we are actually negatively on the back foot. And there does need to be a shift in understanding that as well, and supporting women and helping men actually be the parent that they want to be, and offer them that opportunity to do flexible working as well and help share that load in that parenting journey. Would you think that's something that you would see?
I think that feeds into then a wider picture of how we address discussing our wants and needs. So as a female surgeon, if I go into work and say, I'm tired, or I'm feeling a bit emotional today, or, I've had a really stressful day, or if I try to express any of my softer, vulnerabilities, then that is perceived incredibly negatively. I'm emotionally labile, I'm not reliable, I'm not as good at my job, and it's not somewhere that I feel comfortable going at work, in the workplace. On the contrast, if one of my male colleagues describes these things, then he's in tune with his, emotions, and it's really different. And I think there's a whole cultural piece behind the sleep about how we perceive females and males in any workplace that needs doing in order to make it a safe space for us to then address the real issues, which is the physical, are we sleeping, are we eating, are we okay, and are we cared for?
Absolutely.
So the NHS have obviously got some real challenges. Have you worked with a company that is sort of forward looking in this, who are a good example?
Absolutely. Oscar Kilo is a phenomenal example. They are the National Police Wellbeing Service, and they are the ones that are working towards that 50-50 gender split. And what they did is they brought me in to actually try and change that journey for those expectant parents from before the baby arrives, so they could educate the mums and the dads as to what to expect, how to communicate with each other, how to actually get better sleep in those first days and weeks, and how to create that village. So when they go back to work, they aren't in that position of burning out or carrying that huge load. They don't just do things with me. They've worked with other universities, and they do an awful lot with sleep overall within the police to try and improve their mental health and their physical health and their well-being within the force. They are doing an incredible job.
And Nicole, have you seen similar challenges in other industries as well?
So I find that there are a lot of industries where we're not just looking at the sleep, we're actually looking at the safety aspects of things as well, and the mental health. So we've got things like the construction industry, manufacturing, engineering. They are highly at risk of sleep deprivation through the shifts that they do, the jobs that they do. And also we know that especially in the construction industry, they have one of the highest rates of suicide. And when you think that if you're not sleeping, your mental health is poor, the worse your mental health is, the worse your sleep is, and you get stuck in this cycle. And this is very much the same with things like the legal profession as well, veterinarians, anybody that's got real emotional, long hours, different shift work, it plays a huge part. We see a lot within the education sector as well. So we know the NHS, but we see a lot within the education sector as well. And they're not even doing shifts. They're just doing long hours. They're starting early, they're finishing late, they're taking work home with them. Interestingly, the second research paper we did, we found that actually 52% of people have said that work is going to bed with them, and it is impacting their sleep. So we've got a huge problem. And on that, 62% of people, when they wake up, already don't feel rested. So if we've got people waking up and they're not even starting the day feeling like they've actually had a decent sleep. So we're on the back foot right from the beginning.
So for somebody watching this who might be struggling with sleep right now, what advice would you give them?
Interestingly, I'd say stop stressing about sleep. Because sometimes when we're not sleeping, we go to extreme lengths to sleep better. And that can actually have the opposite effect. Sometimes we need to actually just look at what are we doing in our life and actually educate ourselves on how we actually get better sleep. And so much of it comes down to what we do during the day. Are we actually going outside? The third research paper we're doing, we asked the question, do you go outside for 20 minutes a day into natural light and fresh air? Only 31% of people said they do. You need to go outside for at least 20 minutes a day for the purposes of resetting your circadian rhythm. It's a hugely important piece, and it's what do you do with that 20 minutes, whether it be exercise, doing something for yourself, drinking some water, all these little things that actually, if we think that if we get up, we get in our car, we go to work, we sit at a desk all day, or we're stuck indoors, we're not really doing anything, we go home, we put the kids to bed, for example, and actually we've done nothing for our day, we've done nothing for ourselves, we've not had anything that actually is sending messages to the brain to tell us it's daylight, it's nighttime, or anything like that. We need to actually be kind of saying, what do I do with my day that is beneficial to me? Have I drank enough water? Have I made good food choices? Have I connected with people? Have I got stuff out of my head that I need to get out of my head? Have I prioritized myself in any way, shape, or form? Because if we don't do that, all those things are going to bed with us and they stop us from sleeping. So much comes down to what we actually do during the day. So we actually give ourselves permission to go to bed rather than sleep procrastination. One more episode on Netflix.
I know for me, if I can't sleep, and when you're just lying there and you sort of tossing and turning, I'll just get up and I'll write everything down that's going on in my head, and then I'll be able to sleep better, just knowing that, okay, I'll deal with that tomorrow. Have you got any tips, Rachel, based on your experience?
Yes, I do a few similar things. So the first thing is, if I'm on night shift, I don't eat overnight. So I'll eat before I go to work and I'll eat when I get home. And by keeping my main meals at similar times, I find that makes me shift back into my other routine a lot quicker. And that's taken me a lot of years to understand that helps me. I might have like a biscuit or a snack, and I'll have some caffeine as well overnight to get me through the night. But I don't tend to eat like a full meal. If I think that I'm anxious about, sleeping, or I can't get to sleep, it's probably my own fault because I do take coffee to bed. But outside of that, I do similar things. So I like to plan my next day in advance. And I think that actually our brains are incredible. And if we know what's on our schedule for the next day, they've kind of started to problem solve by the time we wake up. So I'm a really big fan of understanding what my next day looks like, having things either written down in my calendar or, a to-do list or whatever. And I get most things out of my head because I find that I do, the important things stick in your mind and they don't let you rest. And so you need to have a really secure backup plan. So then things are going to happen the next day and you can really let go. I think that helps a lot. But again, exercise, looking after yourself, it's easier to say than do, I think, a lot of the time. But they definitely help me.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on things like lavender, magnesium?
Magnesium is a good one if you are deficient and you've made sure that actually, your kidneys are healthy. I think there's a bit of a problem where people are just going for these things because they've read it on the internet. Lavender, you know what? Yeah, if it makes you feel calm, why not? It isn't going to be the magic cure. It takes time. We've got into so many bad sleep habits as a nation, and it's when you think you've got 4 things that we need to survive. We need to eat, we need to breathe, we need to drink. And everybody seems to forget that sleep is one of the things we actually need for the purposes of survival, not just to live a happy life, actually for survival. It's what our brain is doing. You say then about going to bed and, waking up and things feel better. There is a thing of people saying, sleep on it. Because you do. You go to bed, your brain does all this wonderful stuff, and you wake up and the answer that you didn't have before you went to sleep is there. It's absolutely incredible, and we have to really start prioritizing it. And it can't just be the poor relation, that, I'll get this done before I go to bed. We have to start adding it in. They say, don't they, 1 hour before midnight is better than 2 hours after. And there is a reason for that.
So really interestingly, I have also used sleep in a different way. So when I'm studying intensely for an exam or something, I will use power naps to try and help me refresh, but also to consolidate some information. And I think there is research to suggest that our retention goes up. So I tend to, I don't know if this is good or bad, you can tell me later. But what I used to do is study, have a cup of coffee, set an alarm for 45 minutes, and then essentially have a power nap and then wake up feeling quite refreshed. And yeah, that's a technique that I think a few other people use in order to, as my brain is getting older, to try and retain a little bit more information when I need to sort of upskill on some things.
So Rachel, you've shifted from clinical work into AI and automation.
Yeah.
How do you think this could potentially help?
So I think that tech has got the potential to be really detrimental to our sleep for sure. But I think the one thing that it brings into our lives is data. So I think now there is no excuse for us not getting answers as to what our behaviour looks like, and then answers as to how we can try to improve it and things that we can address. So no longer can we pretend that we weren't doing this or we were doing that. Actually, we've got wearables, we've got all sorts of, tech, smart rooms, smart everything. We can put our devices on any kind of mode that we want to and protect ourselves. We've got to be mindful enough to use the tech in a way in which is productive for us. And I think that there is a responsibility for tech companies to build in options for us to protect ourselves as well. And I think that's going to be something that will be a bigger part of our life in the future. I certainly know that I'm not very well disciplined with my own tech. So my phone pings all night. And yet I managed to somehow sleep through it. And I suspect my sleep is nowhere near as good if my phone was not in my room pinging all night. So I think that it starts with the data, understanding the data, and then using the data to build the sort of lifestyle and sleep patterns and health that we want in the future. But I'm really positive about it. I think it's opening up opportunities because in the same way that you've been doing your research, so that you've got evidence-backed things to take into companies and say, no, sleep is a core component of loss of productivity and poor well-being in the workplace. Well, this data just adds to that, and it gives us some real sort of evidence to make this part of a proper conversation about changing culture.
That's great. I'm really interested to hear about sleep cycles. This is a question that we've had a few times as well. Can you just explain a bit about sleep cycles and how getting to understand our own sleep cycle can help improve sleep?
Okay, so if you've got children, you'll have heard everybody talk about sleeping through the night. And I think it's important to note that there is no such thing. Our night sleep is basically made up of sleep cycles, and we have two different types of sleep. So we have non-REM, which is our really deep restorative sleep. That's the stuff that helps our immune system restore. That's the stuff that is cell reproduction. It's where our growth hormones are released. So that's the really physical restoration. Okay. Then we have our REM sleep, which is our dream sleep. That's where our brain kind of lights up, and that's responsible for our memory consolidation, our memory processing. It's basically a big brain detox, emotion regulation. Now, the first half of the night is predominantly made up of our deep sleep. The second half of the night is predominantly made up of our REM sleep. So at the beginning of the night, our sleep cycles look like moving into that really deep sleep, and we get this really nice deep non-REM 3. And as the sleep goes on throughout the night, we start getting less of the non-REM and we get more of the REM. So by the time we get to the last sleep cycle, we've pretty much got hardly any deep sleep left at all. It's mostly REM sleep. Now, there's also the point where we've got this split in the middle of the night, and it happens at pretty much the same time every night, which is why it's great. We can train our body clocks to do absolutely anything. It's incredible. And around the same time, every single night, we will shift from predominantly deep sleep to predominantly REM sleep. And this is where we also have the issue where people wake up at 3-4 o'clock in the morning needing a wee, and then they can't get back to sleep. Anybody relate? And a lot of the time it's because we've moved from that. We're now in a lighter stage of sleep. We've had 2, 3, maybe 4 hours sleep already. We've woken up, we've gone to the toilet. We're now not tired enough to just fall back to sleep. We can't just put our head on the pillow. We've actually got to work a little bit harder here. We're in our dream sleep, so our brain's kind of going, ping, ping, we've got this going on. Have you remembered this? Have you remembered that? Oh, hang on, and it's harder. And obviously then we've also got our cortisol levels, which are rising because they peak first thing in the morning, because that's what kicks us out of bed for the day. So we're kind of fighting in those early hours of the morning, but that's kind of what's happening through the night, which is why before we go to sleep, we need to bring our cortisol levels down, make sure we've actually got space for that melatonin to release, which is our sleepy hormone. So basically get that kicked in bring our cortisol levels down so they're not meeting too early in the morning and too late at night. So you've got a bigger window, and actually we'll sleep better through the night by doing that.
How can someone recognise if this has become a medical issue?
So when we're talking about it being a medical issue, what we've got to understand is 1 in 3 people are sleep deprived, but 1 in 3 people don't have a medical reason for being sleep deprived. So if we went to our doctors and said, I'm really struggling with sleep, they're just basically going to send us away. If we go to our GP and we say, right, do you know what? I've been tracking my sleep. I've been doing X, Y, and Z. I've been doing this. And actually, do you know what? My sleep hasn't improved, or my number of hours has improved, but I'm still absolutely exhausted. You've then got some kind of tangible evidence to take to your GP for them to listen to you and say, actually, do you know what? Maybe we need to look at this. Most of the time, you would find that people making normal changes to their life, simple things, not spending loads of money, not spending hours a day changing what they do with their life, just really simple things, actually sleep will naturally improve. A lot of it comes down to understanding what's going on, understanding the reasons why we want to do certain things, talking about things, simple things like talking about it. We don't even think about that. But actually, if we get all that stuff that's sitting on our chest off our chest before we go to bed, we are going to sleep better, rather than going to bed thinking about all these things that are happening that actually they probably aren't. We just think that.
That's really insightful. Just one final question. What would be one piece of advice that you would give our listeners, either an individual or a business, who might be listening to this and wants to improve sleep, either for themselves or their organisation?
For me, it would be getting educated and having those open and honest conversations, and actually taking any stigma away from sleep, because as Rachel was saying, the conversation is the piece that needs to be there. Every single person needs to sleep well, regardless whether you're working on reception, whether you're cleaning toilets, or whether you're the director of the business. Everybody needs sleep. So actually make it part of a normal conversation. There are some coaching cards that I created with a company where if you're ever worried about feeling like you're encroaching on somebody's personal space, you could literally pick out a card out of a deck and just throw it on the table in your one-to-one and say, oh, let's both answer these questions. And actually it'd be that two-way conversation. Every single session I ever run finishes with a stop, start, continue, because we need people to take away actionable strategies that they can become accountable for personally, but that actually they can have those conversations within the workplace, and everybody's on the same page. Everybody's reading out the same book. We have to make sleep a priority. We have to do that for our well-being, for our safety, for our productivity. And if that's not happening, how do we make it so it does happen?
Yeah, great.
So I think for me, it's around removing the stigma with regards to acknowledging that I'm sleep deficient. So I don't know whether it's partly being from the northeast of England and saying, I can do this, I can soldier on, I'm strong, I don't need help, or whether it's, to do with being a caregiver, being a doctor, so you're the person that people go to as opposed to the person that's vulnerable. But there's certainly a lot of, badge of honour. I've had hardly any sleep and I can still function, and look at how much I can do and look at how productive I am. And I think it's about being brave enough to be understanding that that's a little bit silly, and that actually productivity and wellness and all the things that you're trying to aspire to do lie at the other side of actually having good quality protected sleep. And setting a good example for next generation, because if I'm a sleep deprived workaholic mum, how can I expect to bring anything other than that up into society? And then it adds fuel to the fire, essentially. So it's really difficult, I think, coming from one culture and changing your mindset. So it starts from within, I think, doesn't it? Just being brave.
And what you've just said there is exactly that. Culture is taught, not caught. And it really is. And we're seeing, you say about what we're passing down to our children, we're already seeing that with graduates. So graduates are coming out of university and they're going into workplaces, and it's worse since we've got COVID, since we've gone through COVID. And we've got this always on culture. Nobody leaves work at the office anymore. It goes home with people, and people are sending emails at 10, 11 o'clock at night, it might work for them because maybe that's the shift that they're working, which is great. But the problem is the person that might be receiving an email at 10, 11 o'clock at night doesn't know that person's shift wasn't during the day as well. And we've got a lot of graduates that are kind of coming in and thinking that this is the culture that they're supposed to be doing. They've got to be doing this all the time. They've got to be constantly on, and they're burning out. And that is what we are passing that down, and we're not modelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's clear that we need to make sleep a priority. I'm going to leave your contact details in the show notes, but thank you for joining me for this conversation.
Thanks.
Thank you.